Thanks for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Noma Cork by Vinventions. Driven by a commitment to innovation, the new plant-based Noma Cork Green Line offers significant improvements in wine closure performance. Thanks to a rigorous oxygen ingress rate, you can decide which cork is best for your wine, whether it's for young and fresh wines or for those with ageing potential.
And Kriebehl arrived in London to study English literature at university with 2 suitcases and a rucksack. After publishing her first piece about the 50th anniversary of the end of rationing in the Financial Times, she slowly moved into wine writing and has never looked back. Hers is an inspiring tale of perseverance and talent, leading to the Master of Wine qualification and recognition as an expert on Pinot Noir and German wines. Hello, Anne, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Tim. Lovely to be here.
But where are you? I mean, you spend so much time Germany, Austria, Champagne, but you're in London, I think, aren't you?
I am in my office in London, in deepest suburbia, where I actually love to be here at my desk.
Good to hear. Germany. We're going to talk a lot about Germany because you are German, even though you speak perfect English, little bit of a German accent, not much. You were brought up in Germany. Was it in a wine region or not, or close to a wine region?
While I am from Baden in Germany's southwest, I'm actually from the northern part of the Black Forest. So that is a little bit too cool for vines. But my dad actually had orchards and grew fruit, which he then harvested and fermented and then distilled into eau de vie. So that's much more the thing where I'm from.
So eau de vie rather than wine?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. And your parents drank eau de vie, or do they drink wine as well?
My parents barely drank wine. My dad, on the weekend, sometimes would have beer. My mom didn't drink at all. But when my sister and I were little and we had a cold or anything, my dad said, "Oh, have a schnapps." And of course, it was horrendous for us children because it was just, burning. But, the swollen ankle or whatever, there used to be some schnapps around it and then a bandage or something.
Schnapps was like medicine in your family, was it?
Yes, indeed.
I mean, brought up in Baden then. But what made you decide to do a degree in English literature in England, of all places? I mean, were you always a bit of an Anglophile when you were growing up as a kid?
Yes, and it is actually, I can't quite explain it because neither of my parents speak a foreign language. Neither was I brought up, in a very worldly way. And we never even took foreign holidays when I was a child. But for some reason, and I wish I knew what it was, for some reason I intuitively knew that learning English would be my passport to the world. And what was lovely was that I never even had to learn it. Sort of we were given a sheet of vocab each week and I read it and I knew it. I didn't have to I didn't struggle at all. And it came to me very easily and I loved it from the first moment on.
And so you went to Birkbeck, didn't you? And I think you arrived, you said 2 suitcases and a rucksack. That's pretty brave, isn't it, in those days?
Well, you must imagine that I grew up in the deepest provinces. And I basically couldn't wait to get out of there. And I knew I needed to get out of there. And I remember, when you talk about learning English, I actually learned an awful lot of English by listening up and down the albums of Simon and Garfunkel. And, understanding the a freshly fallen silent shroud of snow, kind of stuff like that. And there was little old Anne in her little southwestern German village dreaming of the big wide world. And so I knew I had to get out. And it took me a long time to figure out how to do this, just because I guess it was also a different time and my parents were much older than, they were old enough almost to be my grandparents. And so this was never, like abroad. Why go abroad when you can stay at home, where you know everything? And so I had to free myself a lot from that shit. But I managed to get a scholarship to go to the States. And so I spent a year in the States and I went to a community college for half a year. And the next half year, I actually worked in Manhattan. And that was amazing.
How
and
stylish.
again, there were total echoes of, Simon and Garfunkel when I first, when the coach that picked us students up and we were on the New Jersey Turnpike, all I could think was like counting the cars on the New Jersey Turnpike. They've all come
They've all
to
gone
look
to look for America. Beautiful
Yes.
song, yeah.
Yeah.
And you went to London, so you studied at Birkbeck, but you studied in the evenings, and
Yes.
you worked during the day, didn't you? Which is amazing. But you didn't work in an Oddbins or a Majestic, as some people did at the time. You were doing something a bit more mundane, weren't you? Were you a secretary for somebody?
Well, yes. And you see, because I had been brought up in a very sensible, pragmatic Lutheran household, things like, why study literature? It's like, or art or whatever. No, you go to work, you earn your living, and all is very sensible. So I actually had trained before I even went to the States. I had left school at 16, and I had trained in that German vocational training system, which is actually a bit problematic because in Germany, very early on, you either take a vocational path or you take an academic path. And once you go down the vocational, it's very hard to get back on an academic path. And so I had gone down that route, and I had done a business administration qualification, which is a bit like a BA in business admin or something, not very high flown, but just very practical. And that is what enabled me to get that scholarship, which was for young vocational trainees like me.
Yeah.
But then I realized, in the States, my mind was opened, and I realized this world was big, and you could study, and there was a world out there. And so I then, when I had to come back to Germany, I thought, fuck, what do I do now? And it was sheer luck that through friends of friends, I found out that there was Birkbeck College, because that meant I could, as long as I passed an entry exam, they would take me on, which in Germany wasn't a given. And and plus, the absolute wonderful thing was I could earn my living. As long as I earn my living, earn my own money, I can do what I like, you see. And so that meant flying here and sitting an entrance exam and finding a job agency. 4 weeks later, going to
in a foreign language as well. Yeah.
Sorry.
In a foreign language as well. Your English was good by then, but not as good as it is now.
You must imagine that it never was difficult for me to write or speak English, and I had already spent a year in the States, and it was, when I was a teenager, I had written my diary in English, so my mom couldn't read it, stuff like that.
Okay. Secret Anglophone. So when did you decide you wanted to write? I mean, you finished your degree. What was your first piece? It was published in the Financial Times, wasn't it? In English. Amazing.
Yes. So basically, I worked initially in a bank, in Citibank initially, doing an completely and utterly stultifying job. And I got a job in a bank simply because I had done import-export papers in Germany. And I went to school at night. 3 times a week, I went to school at night. And I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And then, I left my Citibank job and I started work at Deutsche Bank as a secretary, answering telephones for a team of like 8 or 10 bankers. And, and then, you graduate and it's wonderful. And the next day you just go back to back to work. And it was a huge anticlimax. And of course, now I can quote Shakespeare. Now I can sort of write an essay about Wordsworth and the sublime in English literature and all that bullshit. But it does not really, qualify you for a job. But what I had known was that I wanted to write. And so I signed up for 2 short courses at City University, just evening courses, and I gave myself permission to give up whichever one was not right for me, which is a big thing because I'd always been taught to, like what you start, you pull through and finish and blah, blah. There's a lot of that Lutheran rigidity in there. And so I did, feature writing and fiction writing. And very quickly, I just stopped doing the fiction thing, and I loved feature writing, and that put me on a path of writing something that I like and know. And so, of course, I started writing about food. And I then pitched all sorts of places, and I remember the Telegraph once got back to one of my pitches, and they said, "Oh, where have you been published before?" And I said, "Oh, I've not been published." And the last thing I heard from them. And then it took me another 3 months at least to write another pitch. I was so, I had no self-confidence.
So
And
what was the
then
piece on in the FT? Tell us.
that was actually because that harks back to 1930s literature, 1940s literature, when I wrote about the 50th anniversary of the end of rationing, because I loved the books by Constance Spry. She wrote a wartime book called Come Into the Garden, Cook. And so I had pitched a completely different story to the weekend editor of the FT, who was Richard Addis. And I called up my email pitch, and he was really ghastly to me. And he says, "Oh, well, what you pitched is not topical at all. And the people who write for the FT, we really need to know them a lot better." And I don't know, I wasn't meek on that day. I must have had, I don't know, premenstrual syndrome or whatever. So I said to him, "Well, you tell me what I have to do to write for the FT and what I have to do so you get to know me better." Then he says, "Oh, write me 500 words on why you should be writing for the FT." And I did that. And then he commissioned me. He asked me to send far more ideas. And this was one of the ideas I sent. And it was about, rationing in England lasted until 1954. And this was summer 2004. And so that was the 50th anniversary. And so I
that was your first piece.
Yeah, wrote, and then I got one entire page, and he asked me to cook a wartime meal to go with it. It was wonderful.
I hope you still got it. Let's move on to your career now, because we've got lots to get in. You did a vintage at Felton Road, didn't you, in Central Otago in 2009, one of the most famous wineries in New Zealand. I mean, would it be an exaggeration to say that changed your life, that experience?
No, because it did change my life. And it was, so I was first published in 2004. I had a mortgage. I also had, my personal life was completely fucked up by some asshole. And, I had put him through his postgrad. I was accepted for a postgrad, which then never materialized. And so I just had to carry on working. And it took me until 2008 to be able to leave the bank. And I had hoped they would fire me, because then I could tell my mom, "Oh, I was fired, nothing to do with me." But, in the end, I left of my own devices. And then the first thing I wanted to do was, to work harvest. And New Zealand was very appealing. And it was actually Roger Jones who made the connection to Felton Road.
Roger Jones, the chef, yeah?
Yes,
yeah.
Who I'd met at a Burgundy tasting, who introduced me to Nigel Greening. And, I had started doing wine courses back in 2006. At that point, in 2008, I was completely embroiled in my WSET diploma. And in March 2009, I left for New Zealand. And boy, was it the best thing I ever did. It was the most beautiful, life-affirming, visceral, real thing I could do after working for such a long time on a trading floor, and seeing, because I worked in asset-backed commercial paper, which was at the epicenter of that securitization bubble. And I had witnessed a lot of shit going on at the bank, and, the masters of the universe strutting around, like, "Oh, I'm going to have my hair cut in New York," and bullshit like that. And so to go and actually be in a vineyard and do something that was so real was just exquisite. And it appealed to me at a level that was just fundamental,
And you've subsequently gone to work in Baden, back in Germany, Barbaresco, obviously in Piemonte, and the Mosel. I'm just getting your hands dirty as you were doing. Does that give you a greater understanding of wine, do you think? You'd have done it at Felton Road. If you went to these other places, did you start to really get into wine at that point?
Well, I had got into wine earlier, and I'd started writing about food, and I wrote a little bit more about food, but then I realized that the barriers to entry were very low, and this was also still a different media landscape then. And I realized, okay, wine is different, and I started taking wine courses, and I started the WSET in 2006, and having met Roger Jones at a Burgundy tasting tells you that I fell in love with Pinot Noir fairly early on. And that was always a motivation. And, you asked me, did I work at Oddbins or at Majestic? That would never have occurred to me working in retail in wine, because when I came to England, I wasn't in wine. And I was just so, I did that thing where, you go to work in an office as you were taught, and then, struggling free to become a freelance was a huge step. And I was very, very, very nervous. And I still continued temping as a secretary, etc., etc. But of course, I knew by then that wine was my thing, because wine is that thing that connects everything, culture, history, geology, biology. It's just, for me.
That's why we love it, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So, yeah.
You've mentioned it already, but you've had this sort of long love affair with Pinot Noir, really. I don't think love affair is overstating it. You wrote your dissertation about German Pinot Noir, your Master of Wine dissertation. You published this beautiful, lyrical monograph about the variety for the International Food and Wine Society recently. You're a keynote speaker at the Pinot Conference in the Mornington Peninsula. I've done that as well. What do you love about Pinot? Because I like the thing in the monograph, you say it engenders obsessiveness. Why is it, do you think? What do you love about it? Why does it engender obsessiveness?
Well, I have a theory, and that was what my keynote speech was about in Australia. I think, wine, of course, has been part of our human experience for a very long time. But single varietal wine is the first single varietal wine to be made as such and with intention and care was Pinot Noir. And it's the one grape variety that has been with us humans for the longest. And when people today think about climate change and blah, blah, Pinot Noir is the thing that has, it's this like this pas de deux, where humans and Pinot Noir influence each other. And actually, while I was harvesting in New Zealand in 2009, I read this beautiful book by, now his name is gone, you will know him, The Botany of Desire. I can look it up quickly if you like me to.
No, that sounds good. The Botany of Desire. Wow.
And where the theory is that, like dogs became men's best friend in order to survive, and look how successful they were. The idea in the Botany of Desire is that plants are just the same. They make themselves amenable to our manipulation, and therefore evolve alongside us. And I think that is why Pinot is such a product of human interaction, just like roses in the garden, And
it's part of us. It's part of our DNA almost, yeah.
Exactly, and something that it's something that goes beyond bare survival. It's not like bread and grain and nutrition. It is transcendence, psychoactive stuff, but not like vodka and Red Bull. It's psychoactive stuff in a more transcendent way.
Maybe it speaks to us in a way that we don't fully even understand. There's something visceral about it, yeah?
Yes, I would say that. And that's my theory about Pinot. And then, it's just, I just like that it isn't so full on, that it's tender and translucent and it doesn't knock you out. And that's something I love about it.
And you can drink more than one glass, right? You can drink more than one bottle, I hope. Listen, I want to ask you a little bit about writing in English, because you write brilliantly in English. In fact, you write better in English than most wine writers using their native language. As you said, there was a fairly low barrier to entry. I mean, are you still German at heart, or have you become a Brit? I mean, which language do you dream in?
The dream question is one I am asked very often, but I can tell you that so long as I do not encounter other people in my dream, there is no language, you see? The only time language happens in a dream is when you have conversations or when you speak. But very often dreams are not like that, you know? And I will always be German, and I am a totally continental European in so many ways, but I am uprooted. And I have not become a Brit, even though I now have a British passport, but I have become a Londoner. And I hope you know what that means, because
I do, very
London
much.
is like a mother, you know, she takes us all the misfits. And London has welcomed me, and I feel like a Londoner. I feel like a citizen of the world. But my heritage is distinctly continental European in so many ways. And I say continental European rather than German, because I place it as at a level of latitude. You know, I have a lot in common. You know, the food of my latitude, which is 48 degrees north, is very much the same no matter where you go. And so, yeah, it's
I like that. I like that you that we're marked by our latitudes. Listen, I want to talk to you a bit more about German wine. Neat segue, as I know, because you published this amazing book, The Wines of Germany, award-winning book, against some very strong competition that year as well. I think you published that in 2019, and you continue to cover the national wine scene today. How hard is it from here to keep up to date and write about a country? 13 different wine regions? It's a complex place, Germany, isn't it?
Well, it is a complex place, and Germany's wine regions cover 4 degrees of latitude, and they're all bound by the same law. And that in itself, you know, the way we learn, or we can even say the way we are indoctrinated about wine when we take any kind of wine course, you know, you start with Bordeaux and its classification, then you move on to Burgundy, and then you move on to the Loire and Alsace and Languedoc. And then, you know, comes Italy. And of course, Piedmont is always treated separately from Tuscany. And then you have the one big lump of Germany. And to other wine cultures, which are just as ancient, it would actually be preposterous to just, you know, stick the Mosel under the same law as Baden. And yeah, so it's difficult, because it is a very fragmented and a very diverse wine landscape, which is to do with the fact that Germany didn't become a nation state until the late 19th century. And
People like Italy, people forget that, don't they?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, German wine went through a terrible time in the 70s and 80s. That's the 1970s and 80s. I mean, very famous. You know, you see these old wine lists from Berry Brothers from the turn of the 20th century, where the German wines were priced at the same prices as Burgundy and the best, finest Bordeaux. But what happened to German wine? I mean, why did it sink so low?
Well, because the German wine law was an old law, and it always had room for fudging. And then in the 1950s, there were the first Roman, the Roman contracts, so the first precursors of European integration, which were purely economical and not political at the time. But then in the 1960s, European integration went forward, and Germany was under pressure to finally bring its wine law in line with European wine law. And the other thing that had happened in Germany, which is often not seen, because we need to see the law in its cultural context. So Germany, as the aggressor in 2 world wars, and as, you know, as a country that you know, turned murder and persecution into a fine art, finally grappled with its guilt in the 1960s, when that first post-war generation was old enough to question everything. And then there was, you know, You might know about the 1968 revolts. You might know about out of that coming the Bader-Meinhof gang.
Yeah.
And a political environment where egalitarianism was prized. And it was a fact that in Germany, in a pre-climate change Germany, the most privileged vineyards were owned by old aristocratic estates. And that also meant people wanted to do something egalitarian. Plus, there is another very German trait, which is, pre the two world wars, Germany was often thought of as das Volk der Dichter und Denker, the people of philosophers and poets. And then it absolutely became a country of technocrats. And the post-war idea was, and also of the new wine law that was drafted in 1969 and then changed again and then properly implemented in 1971, was that, we're going to rationalize everything, and you can improve everything, and the only parameter for quality is actually ripeness, the ripeness of the grapes and the sugar level of the grapes. And if we have new German crossings, that were bred to clock up sugar like nothing else, you can make a Spätlese in a potato field. And this is in effect what happened. Plus, so many single sites were subsumed into much larger sites. The consumer could not tell by the nomenclature whether this was a historic single site or a newly invented collective site. So in a way, the German wine law of 1971 forged a path down a terrible consumer deception, where you had formerly great wine and an idea of quality, then somehow mashed into something that wanted to be egalitarian. But we all know that wine cannot be egalitarian, that wine is in its very, what we do, scoring wines, it's all about everything is elitist. So, you can talk about the German wine law until dawn tomorrow, and not,
we need to. I think we need to move on to another question, but there's a brilliant analysis of it. Do you think that's still true, that image? Cheap Liebfraumilch, Niersteiner, Gutes Domtal, although historically that was a great name, as was Liebfraumilch, really. Is the image changing of German wine? When did the modern revolution that you write about so convincingly in the book, when did that start, do you think?
I think it started in Germany in the 1990s, and then it took quite a while to be heard abroad. But then I think it finally happened in the early 2000s and in the 2010s. And a great part of that was the große Gewächse, that sort of dry wine from a single classified vineyard, from certain single grape varieties. And the first ones came out in 2002. And now now Großes Gewächs is something that everybody knows, or GG, and they had a huge influence on this.
Like a Grand Cru, isn't it? To translate for people who don't speak, it's a Grand Cru, yeah?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But a Großes Gewächs means a single varietal wine from a single classified vineyard made to exacting standards. Whether they're all made to these exacting standards, whether all Grand Crus are deserved or not, is another question. But the point was that for once, in a lifetime, Germany had something that was easy to explain and easy to understand, and it was dry. And then, of course, climate change. In the 1980s, there would have been 4 vintages that actually ripened grapes, same as in Burgundy, but people forget that.
4 vintages in a decade, you mean?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Sorry. And it was pretty much the same in Burgundy, but people have forgotten about this. I think it's very, very, very wholesome to read, say, Anthony Hansen's book from the early 80s on Burgundy. And then it took Germany much longer. But now there is not a single year in which you cannot ripen grapes fully. Even though it might be a challenging year like 21 or a cooler year like 14, but you can ripen grapes reliably in every region to make dry wine. And that is possibly the single most defining factor.
Yeah. I think that's very true. Riesling is widely regarded as Germany is indeed one of the world's greatest varieties, but I think it'd be fair to say it's not widely appreciated. I mean, consumers don't always get Riesling, and it's seen as a difficult sell. I mean, somebody told me recently that Germany sells more Pinot Gris or Grauburgund or Pinot Grigio, probably under that label sometimes, to the UK than it does Riesling. Is that true? It's pretty tragic if that's the case, isn't it?
I actually do not know if that statistic is true. But you see, there was a time when I was young and foolish, and I thought one had to convince people.
You still are. You still are.
I'm still foolish, yes. But, I do not see my job as that of a missionary, because I personally don't like to be missionarized, because the very idea means that, I think I know better than you, and I tell you what you should be drinking, what you should be thinking, etc., etc. I don't subscribe to that at all. I think that when people like something, they gravitate towards it. And if people like Riesling, they will gravitate towards it. That means they need to like acidity. And I personally believe that it is our capacity of our bodies to take that acid that determines whether or not we will like Riesling. And I think it is a wonderful and a thrilling and unique grape, but it will be a niche interest. And there is too much wine in the world. I do not know if there's too much Riesling in the world, but those people who like it, they will find it. And if you go to Riesling-specific events, it's quite a cultish thing. And so I'm not worried about this.
It's often the same people, isn't it?
Yes, it's kind of. I don't think it's bad to be in a niche, and I see that differently. I don't think the world needs to start drinking Riesling. Neither is it my job to convince anyone. If I tell you, when I was at, when I had my annual appointment at one German winery at Fritz Haag, there was a table of a whole gaggle of like 6 or 7 20-something women who were all they had made an appointment. They came there to taste wine specifically. And I just thought this was the most wonderful thing. And then at other wineries, there are also young people. And if you go to the Mythos Mosel event or the Saar Riesling Summer, there are tons of young people. And it's kind of hip, but in a niche, but that's fine.
With a small group. That's okay. I mean, you're also a champion of the diversity of German wines, not just Riesling. I mean, which other varieties do you think have the most potential? You've been very dismissive, rightly so, I think, of some of those crossings that were developed in the 70s. Some of them grown in England, of course, obviously. But which varieties other than Riesling have the most potential? Pinot Noir would be one, yeah?
Well,
Spätburgunder? Yeah.
Spätburgunder, definitely. And there have been vast strides made there. And I think something like 2006 already. As long as that, Germany has been the 3rd largest producer of Pinot Noir in the world.
Nobody knows. How many hectares? It's got like 12,000. How many thousand hectares are you saying?
So something around 11,000. And so
I thought it was 12,000. Yeah.
The largest grower of Pinot Noir in the world is France, but there's a vast portion of that is, of course, made into Champagne. Then it is the US, chiefly California, and then comes Germany. And
so Germany makes more Pinot Noir than New Zealand, right?
Baden alone used to have just a little bit more Pinot than New Zealand. Now New Zealand has overtaken Baden. But I tell you what, a few weeks ago, I was in Baden at an event called the Landweinmarkt. So a splinter group of producers that reviews the official, Qualitätswein or Prädikatswein designation and voluntarily declassify their wine into Vin de Pays, Landwein. And I tell you, it's a dire picture, because there are more than 5,000 hectares of Pinot Noir in Baden alone, and about 60 to 65% of the vineyards are under cooperative control. And these cooperatives make wine that is then sold in a liter bottle for like €4 in the supermarket. And they sit on old wine Pinot vineyards. They, one of the mother of all bloody co-ops doesn't even have an export person. And I tell you, if I was more entrepreneurially minded and more business minded than I
You'd bring
am,
them in.
I'd persuade them to create a lovely brand of, both you and I know Gerd Stepp, who makes Palataya for Marks and Spencer from Pfalz Vineyard. And why not do something amazing like that? But I mean, they're sitting on their hands, and it is a criminal waste of talent, of vineyards,
Pinot.
yeah.
Quickly, which other varieties would you say? Pinot Gris, obviously, Weissburgunder, Pinot Blanc.
I have a soft spot for Silvaner, but I'm also very excited about Sekt, traditional method sparkling wine from Germany, which I love drinking.
And Scheurebe? I like Scheurebe. Am I allowed to like Scheurebe?
Totally. You're allowed to. Anything goes. Anything consenting adults do is allowed, Tim. Even Scheurebe. I'm not that much into Scheurebe, but it's got these intense aromatics, but it's also got acidity. But I must say I don't have Scheurebe in my cellar, and I also must confess that even as a German, I prefer dry wine. I'm not largely into sweet wines at all. I prefer my wines dry.
Even a sort of Prum Cabinet or Spätlese, would you relent there?
They are these wines with age. They somehow transcend into something that I would call balm. They always remind me of something that I would give to somebody who needs strength or comfort, because they are so gentle, and yet they so go under your skin,
Yeah. They're beautiful wines. Katharina Prum was on the podcast a few weeks ago. She was amazing. Tell us about your next projects. I mean, you've done this monograph on Pinot. I think we're all hoping you're going to do a big Pinot book, but you're pretty busy. You're writing for Vinus, which is a very good website. You're covering, Austria, Germany, Champagne, and probably other things as well.
And Alsace.
Alsace as well, yeah. Next project, are you going to have time for that Pinot book?
Well, there are 3 books that I want to write, and they are all sort of in the offing, but as you say, it's about finding the time. And one of my greatest achievements this year was to actually not work every weekend. I used to be married to my job. This year I'm actually getting married to a real person. So
Hooray!
There is a shift in balance, which is wholesome, I must say, because I used to basically just work. I know that with this new balance, I will have time, hopefully, to start tackling a book project. And yes, I would adore to write that longer book on Pinot Noir, just because I have such a fascination with the grape. And,
I think we'd like you to write it too. Yeah.
Cool. So yes, there's always, ideas, words, language. Yeah, always.
And I mean, what do you do in these weekends that you're now taking off? I know you like to swim, don't you? Garden, entertain. What else? How do you spend your time away from wine?
Well, cooking, gardening, walking, sometimes running, swimming, going to the theater, going to Pink Martini concerts, So there's just spending time with my beloved and being together is,
Well, and we share a passion for Pink Martini, and I'm very upset that you're going to see them very soon. I'm going to be away when they're on at the Albert Hall. So
they were last Sunday. They were
last Sunday. Were they brilliant?
Yeah, they were wonderful.
Well, I hope you blew a kiss at China Forms, who's my secret crush. Am I allowed to admit
She is my secret crush too, and I screeched and applauded, and she must have known that she had great fans even in the cheese.
There we go. It was good to hear. Listen, Anne, it's been brilliant talking to you. So many other things we could talk about. We're looking forward to the Pinot book. Anybody who wants to read your stuff, the best place is World Fine Wine, Decanter, and Vinous if you have a subscription. Otherwise, the monograph is available, isn't it, from the International Food and Wine Society, and of course your magnum opus, The Wines of Germany, still available through all good booksellers and retailers. And see you very soon, my friend.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Anne is such a breath of fresh air. She has plenty to say, and it's always based on passion and a deep understanding of her subject. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is the refreshingly outspoken wine merchant, Daniel Lambert. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter, @TimAtkin, and on Instagram, @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.